Hello, this is just a quick overview of chapter number 6. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our descriptive research, just kind of an overview. It's basically that it just describes just as it is indicated. So you can make comparisons before and after. This is a very common structure for like a pre-test, post-test type thing. It can involve collection of information on a particular group or in multiple situations. So descriptive research is just a basic level as far as using descriptive statistics just to indicate what had happened, not to correlate or do some of those higher functions that you find in research. So, as I mentioned, we can define what descriptive designs may be, and they may vary quite a bit. So, as you're reading your articles, take a look at how the study is actually designed and look at the basic components in order to determine what's going on with the descriptive design and whether it is an effective design for what the researcher seeks to gain. So really looking at descriptive designs, there's a couple of different types which you may run across, and one is case studies and the other is surveys. So when we look at case studies, they are individual, and when we're looking at the hierarchy as far as the literature, that is one of the lower as far as the strength of the research, because it only has just very few in the population that's evaluated. So we're looking at, when we're looking at reliability and validity and transference to broader groups with case studies, it's a really good way to get that very baseline information, but not necessarily something that you can then translate to bigger populations. There needs to be more studies beyond case studies to really solidify that body of knowledge. So as we look at research, it's really important to use to obtain those answers that are very tangible, that you can like do a tally mark or a spreadsheet of just numerically how many had the same experience. So also it's very handy when you're doing particular projects, looking at a particular population and that sector that relies or is involved with where you practice. So when we get into the more complex designs, we're looking at really comparing things where more than one group is observed. So you can kind of compare between the descriptive statistics in one group to another group. So there are some availabilities to really make some of those correlations, but it's based on the group and those particular observations. So it may be that there's some interrelationships that you start analyzing. So when we're looking at those complex descriptive designs, we're really looking at comparing things. So kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at those very complex types of descriptive designs. And then there's also the possibility of a secondary analysis, study within a study, so to speak. So if you're gathering data really not only for one particular study, but sometimes the data will lead you in a different direction or reveal information that you may be able to tweak some of the data that may be encompassed in a study to really expand on what one has learned in the study. So when we're looking at, and big data is the thing, and it's really important for us to know that it exists And with big data, sometimes there's those data sets that are already out there that we can pull information from and gain very valuable information that we can indeed, if the population is big enough, translate and generalize, as long as our study is developed very well and effectively and it correlates with the population that we want to translate to. So with big data, we're looking at big numbers as far as the volume and the variety and really the strength. So when using big data, there are some things to be concerned about, and some of those concerns may be whether all the data is entered in the same way so that it's really comparing those apples to apples. And if the data isn't entered in the same way or from the same sources, then it's kind of comparing apples to oranges, so to speak. So that's something to look at when you're really analyzing the articles that you're reading, to make sure that there is a consistent way to gather that data. And also, we pull a great deal of data from electronic health records, and with that being said, sometimes the electronic health records, there isn't consistency in documentation in the same place, so the data may not pull from the same place, so it may be inaccurate data. So those are all things to think about, and it's also important to think about how the EHR functions and how your processes and policies are in your organization, to make sure that everyone's entering the same information in the same place in the same way. So when we're looking at mixed designs and mixed methods, really this adds a great deal of insight when we're looking at qualitative and quantitative research, as we talked about before. That qualitative really provides a great deal of insight, and the quantitative really defines and is very linear, but it is very tangible as far as the results being distinct statistical numbers that represent your population. So when we're looking at mixed designs and mixed methods, there are really important factors to consider. Timing, the emphasis, and data mixing. So that's something to consider as well. And then as we look at the 4 degrees of mixed method designs, it's really the degree to which the qualitative and quantitative data are integrated. So it may be separated, that the data is collected, analyzed, and reported separately, or it may be that one does qualitative first to gather insight and then moves on to quantitative to inform the other, or vice versa. We may start out with just some regular numbers, but we decide that we want to know more about those particular numbers, and then we move into a qualitative type study. So looking at the 4 degrees of mixed methods, we're looking at comparative as well. We're looking at analyzing things separate, but then the results are linked together, and this is a very common use of quantitative and qualitative design. In addition, it's that data are collected at the same time and the results are analyzed together. So really integrating that insight and the tangible numbers really is a very, using the word again, integrated approach, really connecting the two and really developing that analysis that may examine beyond what some of the other factors may have been, or show that whole picture better, so to speak. So some of the concerns about mixed methods is it appropriate? And these are questions you need to ask while you're doing your analysis of the different articles that you're looking at, including in your literature reviews. And quantitative and qualitative study is really unique, and some researchers gravitate toward one way or another as far as qualitative or quantitative, and one needs to develop an expertise, and sometimes those who do research are not necessarily experts in both methods. So sometimes that's when it's really important to have multiple researchers that have different areas of expertise. So when we're looking at participatory action research, we also want to look at community-based participation. And this is a very real and relevant way to gather information, especially when we're looking at shifting and focusing on the experience of health wherever someone may live. So it's really important to know how one experiences health in the community. So this is something to really start focusing on, and the literature is starting to review more and more, the literature in cases, more and more of the participatory action research. So again, when we're looking at the action research, it is that most other types of research is the kind and amount of participation by the participants is developed by the kind and amount of participation by the participants. I'm having trouble speaking. But anyway, it's really important when we're looking at community-based research. It's about the community also being involved in the development of the research itself and what's important to the community. And that's a whole different focus versus those experts who come in and really determine what needs to be researched. So this, again, involves the participants in the collaboration and every step of the research, and the community may be involved in actually doing the research. So the aim is to create that knowledge and to take action, and to have that integration from the get-go, so the community is very involved and invested in the process. And very often that community-based or organization-based research is both qualitative and quantitative, again, to build that insight and to grow as we progress. So when we're looking at patient-centered outcomes for research, the philosophy is similar to community-based participatory research. Patients and their families are considered those stakeholders in the research that is conducted. And then we need to move on to the meta-analysis. And this is really important because this is a high level of evidence. So really look at those that have multiple studies on a single topic. So when one does a meta-analysis, they analyze all those studies and look at the body of knowledge versus one particular study. So this is really important to key into. And this goes into initiating a meta-analysis, how to do so as far as conducting the search and making sure that you select relevant studies. And it's important that the studies are selected well, and that, again, we want to avoid comparing oranges to apples. We want to look at apples and apples. So that's what's really important as far as the selection in a meta-analysis. So most frequently meta-analyses are quantitative, looking at correlations, odd ratios from epidemiological studies. So this can be transformed into effect sizes. So this is really important, looking at those numbers that can be translated. In addition, we're looking at refining and weighting certain studies based on their quality. So again, when you're looking at meta-analysis, there are multiple different facets to examine. So when we're looking at overall, you want to look at the types of studies and what's out there and whether a meta-analysis is appropriate. So when we're looking at those meta-analysis, again, it's important to look at interpretive synthesis if you're looking at qualitative studies. So looking at those key factors are really important. And when we're finishing off with meta summaries, they are used when the data is summarized rather than synthesized. So that's really important. We're summarizing versus synthesizing. So if you have any questions about this particular chapter, please let me know. But this